Welcome back to Daily Quotes, Episode 3, Timeless Wisdom for Timely Transformation. Today we got the Dalai Lama. Remember that not getting what you want is sometimes a wonderful stroke of luck. I think this is a very wise way of looking at life in the sense of when you really can integrate this. I know for me, the way it shows up is it's like a deep trust in the way things unfold. Right, so if I don't get a job that I really want, or a relationship doesn't work out, or something changes that I intended to get and then it doesn't happen, this kind of wisdom, what it does for me is say bless it, thanks, clearly I wasn't supposed to have that or get that job or whatever, because otherwise I would. And I think there's a little bit of a dangerous thing there around giving up, maybe that could happen, where it's well, if you really do want that job, just because you got one no doesn't mean you shouldn't keep trying, or try for that, call them back, and be persistent, or sometimes that is needed. But when the door is fully closed, I think it's to trust, to this quote, remember that not getting what you want is sometimes a wonderful stroke of luck. That relationship might have actually ruined your life, or that job was not the right job for you, that boss or the supervisor or whatever would have actually caused harm to you along your journey in some way or something like that, right? So and again, it's the way he says that to me is a deeper trust, that there's a deeper river of your life that you sometimes may be conscious of and sometimes you're not, and that life sometimes steers you in really intense or really hardcore ways that sometimes we're why is this happening? But if we can, especially with the Dalai Lama, right, very spiritual based person, take the time to consider why is this happening, right? When something doesn't go our way or happens differently than we wanted, and sometimes we need support. We can't always do it for ourselves. We need to talk with someone or reflect in a certain way, or whatever it is, the way that we can process something like that to understand the deeper wisdom of where we are being guided to, or the lessons we need to learn in this life, right? We all have different life curriculum, and sometimes we don't like it, and that's fine. And there's different spectrums of it, and sometimes our life curriculum is to stand up against injustice. Sometimes our life curriculum is to go through a really hardcore death in a family. And those things are calling out parts of ourselves that need to be present in the world. Strengths, qualities, abilities, contributions. And without those things, it's easy to say, and again, that's the whole point, right, is to take a step back. But I think there's truth in it, at least for me. I'm curious for you, right? When we have really hard things happen to us, or injustices in the world, what is it calling out of us that's actually needed? Or when things don't go our way, what are the qualities in us that are being evoked that are actually really important for us to have access to be able to express? And I definitely have some privilege here, right? White male, presenting cisgender, the whole thing. And that, where my mind is going is well, if I get pulled over by a police officer and get harassed or threatened or hurt, or killed, but this is when we're actually in retrospect of an experience, it's easy for me to be well, what's the meaning? What's the cool lesson you can learn in all this? And I think that touches into some really big macro learnings of humanity. That we as a species are going through a lot of learning. And in, racial justice work, it's my job as a white person to see how I perpetuate privilege, how I perpetuate injustice, how I perpetuate racism, and that it's not like, this quote is like in contrast to like the trauma of racism, right? Like, remember that not getting what you want is sometimes a wonderful stroke of luck. It's like there's a real friction there, and I think it's important to really think about how we deal with that friction, right? Because there's this whole idea of spiritual bypassing, where it's like, well, everything works out perfectly. It's like, well, maybe for you, maybe for me, but what happens when it doesn't for someone else? And is there any usefulness in this quote for someone who gets pulled over by a police officer and killed or harassed or hurt? I don't know. What do you think? Is it lucky that it didn't go their way? Right? And so I think that's also something that's happening in my experience of human evolution, is there's these like powerful things that people have said that you can always draw truth from, but there's something happening with the complexity of the world, right? Like, racism has always been here, but there's in some way it's coming to the forefront in a way that kind of just blows these words out of the water, right? It's like, it's more about action than thinking. It's more about fighting for what is right than trying to make meaning of anything, and instead of twisting it or turning it or trying to understand it, it's just like, that's wrong. We need to do something about that. It's much more direct. And again, the world has always needed that, and yet somehow only recently has it been activated in this way, it seems. I'm sure there's been many cycles of history where there's been big revolutions and overthrowing of pharaohs and who knows what else, right? Like, this isn't the first time humanity has really questioned and challenged the authority and status quo of a certain empire, and yet here we are in the midst of it, reconciling racism, slavery, genocide, political unrest, and the Dalai Lama. So let me know what you think. Remember that not getting what you want is sometimes a wonderful stroke of luck. Does that apply in the modern world? Who does it apply to? Is that a privileged statement? Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next episode.